This recipe is Euskal Oilaskoa or chicken Basquaise. There are several different common variations in Spain and in France, but it is originally from Basque Country. This recipe originates in the Pyrenees Mountains in Basque Country, and it is named for the local domesticated chicken that is used to create the dish. This is a deeply culturally rooted recipe, and the breed itself actually faced displacement by hybrid commercially bred chickens historically, and this initiated conservation efforts in order to preserve indigenous breeds and maintain sustainability within Basque foodways. It's always important to note the history and the community and the experience with the ingredients and the land that they come from and the people that are preparing them in their traditional ways. Because cultural erasure and food apartheid contained within traditional foodways is such a tragic historical microcosm for global indigenous experiences. It is inherent in these recipes and incredibly important to talk about. This recipe in particular is special to me because reconnecting to culture and heritage through food has been an homage of sorts to all of the decolonial efforts that my grandpa made to reconnect us to our ancestry and our culture and our heritage and ourselves and our family when I was a kid. It began with oral histories and shifted into genealogical searches in libraries, and he passed that curiosity on to me. And given that food was something that he and I shared, that made the choice of a Basque dish a a very personal and also a pretty easy one, given how much he taught me growing up. Bonding with my grandpa over food and through food, whether it was the preparation of it, consuming it, sharing it with others, or even harvesting it, it was always a very central part of who I was growing up. And although access to different cultural recipes wasn't as readily available then as it is now, it still feels like a really important piece of my reconnection journey. I used Chef Javier's recipe for this, linked below, as the inspiration, but I am not much of a recipe person, so I looked at his recipe and tried to follow it as closely as possible, and I found traditional recipes from other Basque, Spanish, and French creators in order to kind of understand the dish and its ingredients a little bit better than just rigidly following a recipe. This is something that I also like to encourage my clients to do is to really engage with the food in with every sense that is possible, including curiosity, which is not one of the main five, but it's important. It helps to reconnect us to ourselves through food and improve that relationship that we have with food. It also helps us understand what our limitations are and what accessibility options we have and how to incorporate those when we're making our traditional recipes or our favorite recipes or trying a new recipe or whatever it may be. So, this dish calls for 3 pounds of a whole chicken and 3 ounces of finely sliced Bayonne ham. Well, I don't have access to Bayonne ham, so I got prosciutto as a substitute. Bacon would also be an acceptable substitution, or you could completely skip it. That is an option as well. I already had a tray full of chicken drumsticks in my freezer, so I used that instead of getting a whole chicken. As far as vegetables go, shallots, green peppers, red peppers, garlic cloves, and plum tomatoes are what's called for, as you can see in the recipe that I am making in the video. I substituted some smaller sweet peppers for a green bell pepper, and I stopped at 2 shallots instead of using three because the two that I had already chopped were pretty potent. And I also used a mixture of cherry and plum tomatoes. Depending on what your abilities are, your preferences are, your time constraints, etc., you can always swap some of these for frozen and or canned vegetables. Just make sure that you're paying attention to the sodium content and make sure that that aligns with your personal needs. I am a big fan of season to taste, modify as needed. So for this recipe, bay leaves, thyme, salt, pepper, and a little bit of baker's sugar if you wanted it were recommended. I also used paprika because this recipe does call for flambeing with brandy. However, I have very, very little ventilation in my kitchen, and that felt dangerous because it is also very small in square footage. So instead of using the brandy, I went ahead and caramelized the onions for just a little bit longer with a little bit of paprika to kind of mimic some of that smokiness. Um, White wine is also called for in this recipe, and so is extra virgin olive oil. Cooking modalities can vary. Sometimes recipes will call for baking, sometimes it's all done in a skillet. Personally, I like a really, really crispy skin on my chicken, so you can either pan fry or sear or grill. You can also marinate overnight. It really just depends on what texture you want for your meat to have. But most of the time, the pepper sauce, the piperade, which is a staple in traditional Basque cuisine, is done in the skillet with your peppers and your onions coming first, letting the white wine cook off, before the alcohol in the white wine cook off before you add your tomatoes, and then garlic, thyme, and your chicken and whatever other herbs you want it to simmer nicely in the pan until that chicken is just melting off the bone. It's just the perfect texture. This dish is typically served with either rice or polenta or tallow or any kind of natural grain or carb would be completely acceptable. As I said, part of creating a traditional recipe and making it yours and staying true to your needs is making sure that it's accessible and also delicious. And it depends on which cultural variety or spin or twist or inspired by that you are making of a cultural dish, because there are a lot of different Latin versions of this dish because of cultural diffusion and assimilation, et cetera, via the colonization that took place at the hands of Spain. And therefore, there are recipes that will call for spicier peppers and cilantro instead of parsley on top. Sometimes potatoes are used for a base. It could be corn. It could be a lot more flavorful. It could be served in a particular manner. It could be served for family gatherings or holidays, or you just make it for a Friday evening meal. This particular meal, traditionally in Basque cuisine, it was a pretty common dish that was made in the region. And even its different variations that have spread across the globe are still more of an everyday type of recipe rather than a particular celebration. And although there absolutely is a need for respecting cultural dishes and the traditional ways of preparing them, we always have to consider accessibility, whether that is a physical limitation within our bodies, whether that's a limitation at our grocery store or with our knowledge in our kitchen, what we have in our kitchen, the time constraints. So we can still respect a cultural recipe while we make changes to it to make sure that it fits in our lives, because food is a dynamic form of medicine, specifically within indigenous cultures. And I think reconnecting to that philosophy of food from that indigenous mindset is an excellent way to reconnect with self, community, and improve relationship with food while nourishing ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. And as always, if you are interested in trying this or any other recipe that you're unfamiliar with, but you know that you like some of the ingredients, try to get as close as you can to the recipe with things that you already know that you like, and then season to taste and adjust from there, because food variety is also very important in nourishment and food as medicine. I hope this was helpful, interesting, informative,